During my time in Comicsgate, there are two common sentiments I have heard in regards to critique. Firstly, we need more of it, like a lot more of it. And secondly, that it isn't fair if a creator criticizes another creator's work. Now, forgive me, but this is like someone who is wearing their glasses saying, "I can't find my glasses." Critique from your peers is as old as literature itself. Writers write, not just creative works, but about the craft of writing and critiquing the works of others. So saying that Comicsgate creators shouldn't criticize Comicsgate books means that Comicsgate, as a movement, has less maturity than a first-year creative writing class. To be blunt, you simply can't say that you want to be taken seriously as creators, but demand to be treated with kid gloves when it comes to feedback. If you want to know why there isn't much serious critique of Comicsgate books, it's because the only acceptable feedback is praise. When someone reads a book they don't like, they simply put it down and never speak of it again. And I know this to be true because I've received it myself. To date, I have put 2 series in the hands of readers. One which was met with high praise and another which was met with cold indifference, where the only way I could improve was to infer that there were problems. So here is what I'm going to do about it. I'm going to review 9 books. I'm going to review them honestly and fairly. That's going to include saying that there are some I didn't like and some that are downright bad. And here's the best part. If you think I'm wrong, you can respond to me. You can challenge my opinion with one of your own. You can challenge my competency of the subject matter. You can even challenge something I've made, because I am a serious artist who is serious about getting better. So I just read Longshots, which is a bundle of comics that were maybe supposed to be sold at Spencer's through a deal with a company that was either completely fraudulent or tragically incompetent. But I just finished reading them all, and now I want to talk about them. Some of them were pretty good and some of them weren't, so I'll put them in order of how much I liked them. One of the comics was Tall Tales, or So I Thought, and it wasn't good. I'm not one to trash things just to trash them, but when I open a book and the very first sentence on the very first page has a syntactical error, that doesn't bode well for the reading experience. This story is perfectly fine. In fact, I would call it imaginative and creative. There's anthropomorphic animals and tribes and wars and bandits, and it's all very engrossing. The problem is with everything used to deliver the story. There were more grammatical errors than I could count, run-on sentences, and so much dialogue. So much redundant, excruciatingly repetitive, unnecessary, grueling dialogue that I actually had to put the book down and rub my eyes on several occasions, and it was only 18 pages long. Here's a tip. When you're writing dialogue, you should almost never use the same word twice in a single sentence. So if you are doing this numerous times and on every single page, something has gone horribly wrong. Quote, "I went back to the tribes thinking I could go back and be the person I once was, but once I learned to love again, there was no going back." There is so much dialogue in this book that the artwork barely feels necessary. I would find myself reading multiple pages before realizing I hadn't even glanced at it. It honestly feels as if the author wants to write prose novels about anthropomorphic animals, but needs pictures to show this. Overall, Tall Tales was a frustrating read. Get this creator, an editor, and some slightly better art direction, and this whole thing could possibly be going places. But as is, I give Tall Tales a 4 out of 10. Another book I read is Revolt, a 6-story anthology by various creators and teams. Some were decent, some were not, and some were kind of embarrassing. Entry 001 is a 4-page sci-fi story, and the last page pulls the "this is what the world is like in the future," but honestly trying to pull the rug out from under the reader in a story that's only 4 pages long just seems like a waste of time, since we aren't all that invested in the first place. So instead of it being a revelation, it's more like, okay, whatever. Would Ye Yet Know More is an 8-page story that features some intriguing art, but I have no idea what it's about or what's going on. I think there are some allusions to some mythology I don't know, and again, for 8 pages, I'm not all that interested in yet knowing more. Also, the writer needs a better understanding of Old English, specifically the differences between present and past tense, as this gets mixed up a couple times. When You Stop is a 3-page story by the creator of Tall Tales and had the best art in the book. It's a neat little snippet of a story that did leave me wanting to yet know more. Or maybe it is part of a bigger one and I just don't yet know more. But I don't yet know more. But I did find it funny that I got more out of these 3 pages than all of Tall Tales. The Tale of Lindy Jacks and the Dog by the Side of the Road has that horrendous indie comic zine, thick line style that I hate. It was 5 pages but could easily have been less, though of the 3 twist endings, it was the only one that I thought was mildly clever. HALCH Singularity was a 4-page waste of time with a comic strip style that I also hated. It was like someone wanted to make a PBF comic and failed so miserably that they thought dragging out the punchline for 2 more pages would somehow fix this, and it just made me angry. The Further Adventures of Ginger Star was a pretty decent chunk of something that I'd be interested in seeing more of. The story grabbed my attention and the art was competent. My only complaint is that the dialogue is on the wordy side of show, don't tell. Overall, pretty good, and easily the best part of this whole exercise. But for a comic with 6 stories, I only got 2.5 that felt interesting or at least competent. So I'm giving this book 4.17 out of 10, since that's how 2.5 into 6 translates. Sword of the Interceptor is the origin story of a British hero and an Arthurian legend. The book's art, layout, and lettering are more than competent, but the book is completely dragged down by the writing. The characters just say everything that happened and why out loud, like, oh, this just happened, and here's what it means, and now this happened. Here's why, and the effect, and how it makes me feel about it. Oh, who are you? Oh, this is who I am, and here's my backstory and motivations. And when they aren't saying everything that's happening, the characters' thoughts are just spelled out in the thought bubble. I know it's a comic book, but there are better ways to convey this. Many of them, in fact. Honestly, it's one of those books that you may actually have a better time reading if you just ignore all the speech and thought bubbles entirely and just look at the pictures and glean what you can about the story. Beyond that, it really wasn't very good, and I'm giving Sword of the Interceptor a 5 out of 10. The Oswald Chronicles is the 3rd story about anthropomorphic animals, and they're all by the same writer, so I guess that's just his thing. Of the 3, this is by far the strongest, as it's a simple story with its own clearly defined internal logic. There's a mouse who learns to speak by watching television and befriends a girl who is terminally ill, and I won't spoil the rest. The writing is significantly better than Tall Tales, but it still bears the marks of its shortcomings. Grammar, overly wordy dialogue, repeating the same word over and over again, and because the story is more enjoyable, the need for an editor's touch becomes more glaringly obvious. There is an inventive, creative storyteller behind these tales, but he is in desperate need of someone to rein in his writing, and despite it being superior to Tall Tales, I'm giving it a 6 out of 10. Hybrids, The Sons of Gods by Matt Stone is a book that left me with mixed feelings. I knew there was a story I liked, characters I liked, and it featured art and especially lettering that did a superb job of visual storytelling. But I also feel like this book is in such a damn hurry. If you were to just list out the events that happened in the order they happened, nothing would be lost in terms of context or characterization. Comics often rely on a visual third-person perspective, where the story is told from the top down. I couldn't help but feel like the story needed some zooming in, like a first-person account from the perspective of Trashman would have made for a significantly more enthralling read. This isn't a bad comic by any measure, but I can't help but get hung up on how the storytelling could be refined in the details, and I'm giving Hybrids a 6 out of 10. Hero Bot Zero is like a mashup of Japanese robot punch-ups and cartoons like the Powerpuff Girls and Dexter's Laboratory, while also trying to evoke a Silver Age comic sensibility, and the thing is, it kind of manages to pull most of this off. The story is about a boy scientist who invents a robot to fight off monster invasions, only the robot's personality gets mixed up with that of a disgruntled janitor who works the lab. So the robot ends up coming off like Thing, only more misanthropic than miserable. There are a lot of comics that try to capture the tone of the classic eras and usually come up well short. Yet somehow this weird book that I went in wanting to hate comes much closer than most. It's a fun read and something to be enjoyed by comic book loving parents as well as their kids. And I'm giving Hero Bot Zero a 7 out of 10. WELLKEEPER does what any number 1 should aspire to, setting things off in the right direction. Like Hero Bot Zero, it was another book that, while it wasn't for me, I can both appreciate for what it was, as well as imagine it being immensely satisfying for a different sort of reader. It has an almost nostalgic charm where you can immediately recognize characters as being decent people trying to do good, even though the stakes are relatively low with it being the first book in the series. But what the book lacks in stakes, it more than makes up for in charm and character, so I'm giving WELLKEEPER a 7 out of 10. Another book I read was God Hand, and it was pretty damn good. And I don't just mean that compared to the other books in the bundle. There's a thrilling story, lore, intrigue, and it's backed up by some pretty stellar art. We're dropped into the tale of Jean Lafette with a 1-page prologue that probably could have been trimmed in half if not removed altogether. We learn that Jean was once part of an organization that fought supernatural entities before he was exiled. Then the story opens with him being brought back into the organization that fights supernatural entities to solve a case. Then every character in the book refers to him having been exiled from the organization that fights supernatural entities. You see how redundant this makes the prologue? It comes off as though the writer isn't confident that his writing can impart his ideas, which is a shame really because the writing does exactly that and doesn't lack in the slightest. Anthony Figueroa is a creator who wears his New Orleans influence on his sleeve, and while it shows in God's Hand, it's something I'd like to see turned up a little bit louder. The dialogue utilizes a lot of cliches, which would have been the perfect spot to replace them with inventive descriptors in Cajun dialect. I know it sounds like I'm being hard on this book, but it's only because of its overall quality. God's Hand was a damn enjoyable read, and I'm giving it an 8 out of 10. Not only do I not have anything negative to say about the writing of Only Death Can Save Us, it actually taught me something new as I learned that apparently there are 2 spellings for the word artifact. This book really nails the prologue. It gives us vital information about the lore of the world without spelling out ideas we'd learn more about later. It also really nails the pacing for a first issue, despite it being jam-packed with the introduction of ideas, incidents, and characters. One criticism I will note is in the character design. It seems to be unevenly dispersed, so you end up with this awesome look for Death, who then teams up with Chrissy, sporting a white t-shirt and blue pants. She honestly looks like a background character in a movie that wandered into the shot. But overall, that's a pretty minor gripe, and I'm giving Only Death Can Save Us an 8 out of 10. And that is my review for the Longshots crowdfunding bundle. I was happy with my purchase despite the fact that out of 9 books, I found grammar and spelling errors in 7. Overall, I got exactly what I wanted out of it, as I was able to check out some IPs I'd never read before, and while there were certainly some that I would probably not revisit, there are others that I can keep an eye out for in the future when their stories continue, and I can get caught up with everything. Anyway, that's it. Bye.